zoo had the sound of a place that believed it was safe. Laughter rolled down the walkways. Cameras clicked in careless bursts. Children pressed their palms against glass, leaving smudges shaped like wonder. It was one of those afternoons when nothing felt urgent, when danger seemed like something that belonged somewhere else far from families and strollers and popcorn carts. Until the screaming started. It wasn't the kind of scream people mistake for excitement. It cut too sharply through the noise, sharp enough to pull heads around in unison. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd near the big cat exhibits. People stepped back instinctively, as if the air itself had shifted. And then they saw it. Something small moved inside the lion enclosure. At first, no one understood what they were looking at. A blur of gray and brown against the grass. Too low to the ground. Too fast. Then it stopped right in the open, and the truth landed all at once. It was a kitten. A tiny bobcat kitten, no bigger than a backpack, stood frozen near the rocks, his sides fluttering with quick, shallow breaths. His ears twitched. His amber eyes were wide, reflecting the wall of humans staring back at him. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just stood there trembling as if his body hadn't yet decided what terror required of it. The crowd went silent in the way people do when they realize they're watching something irreversible. Parents pulled children backward. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice said, "That's not supposed to be in there." A man lifted his phone, then lowered it again, unsure whether recording this would feel wrong. From the far end of the enclosure, the shadow moved. She emerged slowly, massive shoulders rolling beneath golden fur, her presence bending the space around her. The lioness had been lying in the shade unseen until now, but everyone knew her the moment she stood. She was impossible to mistake for anything else. Nearly 400 pounds of quiet power, muscles shaped by years of captivity, eyes shaped by something far heavier. Majesty. Most visitors knew her by reputation alone. The sad lioness, the one who never played, the one who didn't pace or roar or perform for the crowd. She simply watched. Always watching, always distant, as if the world had happened without asking her permission. Now her gaze locked onto the kitten. Time slowed, or at least it felt like it did. The kitten let out a thin, high sound, barely more than air. It echoed too loudly in the silence. A few people flinched, bracing for the impact they were certain would follow. Everyone knew how this story was supposed to end. A lion is not confused by a kitten. A predator does not hesitate because something is small. The math of nature is cruel and efficient, and yet no one could look away. Majesty took one step forward, then another. Her tail flicked once, deliberate, controlled. The kitten crouched, lower ears flattening. His paws slid on the grass as if he wanted to run but couldn't remember how. The distance between them closed, and with it the breath of every person watching. Somewhere behind the crowd, a radio crackled. A keeper's voice cut through the air, sharp with disbelief. "There's something in the enclosure." "I repeat," Majesty stopped. She stood directly in front of the kitten, now close enough that her shadow swallowed him whole. Her head lowered slightly, not in a strike, not in a display. Just lowered. Her eyes softened, though no one there had words for what they were seeing yet. The kitten didn't move. He didn't flee. He didn't scream. He tilted his head the way young animals do when they don't yet understand fear properly. One paw lifted, then dropped back down. His body shook, but his eyes never left hers. Majesty made a sound. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't even loud. It was a low rolling rumble, felt more than heard, the kind of sound that vibrates in the chest. The kind of sound mothers make when they are trying to calm something fragile. The crowd collectively forgot how to breathe. A keeper burst into view near the service gate, skidding to a stop as his eyes found the scene unfolding inside. His hand flew up, stopping the others behind him. "Don't," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Don't move." The kitten took a step forward, a single, uncertain step that felt like a mistake even as it happened. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth. Someone else turned away, unable to watch what they were sure would come next. Majesty did not strike. Instead, she lowered herself. Her massive body folded, careful and controlled, until she was lying on the grass, bringing her eyes level with the kitten's. The gesture was so deliberate, so unexpected, that it sent a chill through everyone watching. This was not instinct as they understood it. This was choice. The kitten reached out. A paw no larger than a human palm brushed against the lioness's nose. A sound escaped the crowd, half gasp, half sob. Majesty closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, something had shifted. She nudged the kitten, gently guiding him closer, her movements precise, restrained. The power she carried was unmistakable, but so was the care with which she was using it. This was the moment people would replay, later the moment they would pause and rewind, trying to find the explanation they had missed. This was the moment everyone felt it. This was not an accident. This was not confusion. This was not nature malfunctioning. Something deeply wrong and deeply human was unfolding in a place built to pretend pain could be contained behind glass. And as Majesty curled her body slightly around the trembling kitten, shielding him from the world that had failed them both, one thought moved through the crowd like a shared heartbeat. Whatever this was, it was not going to end the way anyone expected. And whatever had broken this lioness badly enough to lead her here, it was about to change everything. Majesty had not always been silent. There was a time long before visitors learned her name, long before children pointed and whispered that she looked sad when sound had lived inside her. As a cub, she would have known the rough comfort of a mother's tongue, the weight of siblings piled together in sleep, the instinctive joy of movement without fear. But none of that survived the years that followed. By the time she arrived at the zoo, Majesty had already learned the most dangerous lesson an animal can learn: how to feel nothing. She had been taken young, too young to understand why the world suddenly became metal bars and blinding lights. For years she lived where obedience mattered more than instinct, where applause replaced silence and punishment followed hesitation. She learned to stand still on command, to jump when told, to ignore hunger until it was convenient for someone else. Affection never came without conditions, and pain often arrived without warning. When authorities finally shut down the operation that held her, she was already grown. Her body was strong, flawless even, but something inside her had collapsed inward. She had survived by shrinking herself emotionally, by becoming quiet in a world that demanded spectacle. At the zoo, the staff gave her space, patience, time. They did everything right. They fed her, well enriched her enclosure, paired her with other lions who had known normal pride life. But Majesty never joined them. She tolerated their presence the way someone tolerates noise outside a closed door. She did not groom. She did not play. She did not respond when others called. She watched, always watching. Visitors mistook her stillness for dignity, for wisdom, but the keepers knew better. Stillness can be a symptom. Silence can be a scar. Years passed like that. Seasons changed. Cubs were born and grew and moved on. Majesty remained exactly where she was, lying beneath the same rocky haze, half-lidded, her body present, but her spirit somewhere unreachable. The behaviorists called it withdrawal. The keepers called it heartbreak. And then the kitten arrived. In the minutes after she curled her massive body around the trembling Bobcat, something shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in a way so subtle it would have been missed if no one was looking closely. Majesty's breathing changed. It slowed, deepened, as if her body recognized a rhythm it had not felt in years. The kitten pressed closer, seeking warmth. His small body fit against her chest in a way that seemed impossibly precise, as if space had been waiting for him. Majesty lowered her head, her chin resting near his back. Her eyes closed, not in sleep, but in release. It was the first time anyone had seen her rest like that. The crowd eventually thinned, drawn away by time and discomfort and the return of normal noise. But the keepers stayed. They watched from a distance, afraid that even attention might break the fragile thing unfolding before them. Majesty did not move when the kitten shifted. When he whimpered, she responded with a low rumble, instinctive and soothing. Her tail flicked once, then went still. Every motion was deliberate, careful, restrained, not the stiffness of fear, but the caution of someone rediscovering a feeling they no longer trusted. For Majesty, this was not about the kitten alone. It was about what he awakened. The weight against her chest was familiar in a way memory could not fully explain. The warmth, the vulnerability, the way something small depended entirely on her presence. These sensations reached past logic and training and trauma, straight into the oldest part of her nervous system, the part that had been waiting dormant for permission to exist again. She had not chosen motherhood before. It had been stolen from her before she could ever claim it. Now it was returning uninvited, and she did not push it away. The kitten's fear was obvious. His heart raced, his muscles stayed tense, even as exhaustion pulled at him. But fear does not always repel. Sometimes it binds. Majesty recognized it instantly, not as weakness, but as need. The same need she had once carried inside herself alone and unheard. She adjusted her body, creating a curve, a shelter. The gesture was unconscious, automatic. A behavior no one had trained. A behavior no one had seen from her before. From a distance, it looked like tenderness. Up close, it was something heavier. It was grief finding a place to rest. Majesty's eyes opened briefly, scanning the enclosure, the keepers, the glass. Her gaze was not hostile, but it was alert, protective. She was not guarding territory. She was guarding a feeling. The kitten shifted again, his small paw brushing her leg. He let out a quiet sound, half question, half sigh. Majesty responded by lowering her head and touching her nose to his back, a gesture so gentle it bordered on reverent. No one spoke, because no one wanted to name what they were witnessing yet. To name it would be to admit something uncomfortable, that this lioness, written off as emotionally unreachable, had not been empty at all. She had been waiting for something small enough to slip past her defenses, waiting for a reason to feel that did not come with pain attached. For years, Majesty had survived by staying numb. It had kept her alive. It had kept her safe. But numbness is not peace. It is only the absence of sensation, and absence can become its own kind of suffering. The kitten stirred again, burrowing closer. His breathing slowed, syncing with hers. For the first time since he entered the enclosure, his body relaxed. And for the first time in years, so did Majesty's. Her ears flicked once, then settled. Her shoulders lowered. The tension that had lived in her frame for so long eased just enough to be noticed by those who knew her best. One keeper wiped his eyes without realizing it, because what they were seeing was not just comfort, it was reconnection. Majesty was not becoming something new. She was remembering something old, something that had been taken before it could fully form. The sadness that lived in her had not vanished. It softened, reshaped itself around the fragile weight she now held. It became careful instead of heavy, protective instead of isolating. This was not healing yet, but it was the first honest step toward it. And as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the enclosure, the lioness who had forgotten how to feel lay quietly with a bobcat kitten against her heart, relearning emotion one breath at a time. No one knew how long it would last. No one knew how it would end. But everyone watching understood one thing with painful clarity. This was not coincidence. This was grief meeting grief, and neither of them was alone anymore. Rascal did not understand silence. He had known fear hunger, cold, the confusion of hands that should not have held him, and rooms that smelled wrong. But silence, the kind that sat heavy in the chest and waited for nothing, was unfamiliar to him. Where Majesty had learned to survive by withdrawing, Rascal survived by reaching outward again and again, as if closeness itself were oxygen. At first, his presence beside her seemed tentative. He stayed close, but not demanding, his small body tucked against her warmth, as if sensing that stillness was part of her language. But as the hours passed and the enclosure settled into a quieter rhythm, something in him shifted. Rest had given him courage. He lifted his head. Majesty felt it immediately, the faint change in pressure, the subtle movement against her chest. Her eyes opened halfway, alert but calm. Rascal's whiskers brushed her fur as he wriggled free, tumbling clumsily onto the grass between her forelegs. He shook himself once, then looked up at her with unfiltered curiosity. She did not move. That alone emboldened him. Rascal took one step forward, then another, nose twitching, ears pricked. He studied her face the way young animals study the world, without expectation, without judgment. He reached out with one small paw and tapped her whiskers, then pulled back as if waiting for the sky to fall. It didn't. Majesty blinked slowly. Rascal tried again. This time she exhaled a deep breath that carried warmth and sound, a rumble so low it vibrated through the ground. Rascal froze, startled for a heartbeat, then his tail flicked. He interpreted the sound not as warning, but as invitation. He pounced. It was an awkward, fearless leap, all limbs and momentum landing squarely against her massive foreleg. Gasps rose from the distant observation deck. Every instinct in the watching humans screamed that this was the moment things would go wrong. Majesty did not react the way predators are expected to react. She shifted her legs slightly, not away from him, but around him, creating space instead of closing it. Her head lowered, eyes tracking his movements with something close to wonder. Rascal climbed. He scrambled up her leg claws, catching gently in her fur, his movements clumsy but determined. He reached her shoulder and lost his balance, tumbling back down with a surprised chirp. He landed on his back, rolled once, then sprang upright again, unhurt and undeterred. If Majesty had been thinking, she might have stopped him. But she was not thinking. She was remembering. The bobcat darted around her, batting at her tail when it moved, leaping sideways when she shifted her weight. He treated her not as a threat, not as a god, but as something solid and safe and endlessly interesting. His play was relentless, not aggressive, not reckless, but persistent in the way young life insists on being noticed. Majesty watched him, her eyes following each movement. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her posture changed. She rose onto her elbows. Her tail flicked again, this time deliberately. Rascal pounced. The sound that escaped her chest then was not a rumble. It was a chuff. Low, soft, brief. It stopped Rascal mid-leap. He stared at her, head tilted, processing something he had never heard before. Then cautiously he crept closer, pressing his forehead against her paw. Majesty lowered her head. Their noses touched. No one in the enclosure moved. No one breathed. Because this was not instinct misfiring. This was choice. From that moment on, Rascal made it his mission to pull Majesty out of stillness. If she lay too long without moving, he climbed onto her back. If she stared into the distance, he stepped into her line of sight and chirped softly. If she closed her eyes, he nudged her chin until she opened them again. He refused to let her disappear inward, and remarkably, she allowed it. When he tired himself out, he returned to her chest, curling against her warmth. When he woke, he resumed his work, pawing, climbing, exploring her, like a landscape that was slowly coming back to life. Majesty responded in ways so subtle they could only be noticed by those who had known her before. She adjusted her position to shield him from the wind. She angled her body when he wandered too far, guiding him back without touching him. When other lions in the pride shifted nearby, she placed herself between them and the bobcat, her body a quiet barrier. She did not bare her teeth. She did not roar. She simply stood. Rascal, oblivious to the danger he had wandered into, treated the enclosure as if it were his own nursery. He explored rocks, sniffed leaves, then returned to Majesty to show her his findings, chirping softly as if narrating his discoveries. Each time he came back, her gaze softened further, the tightness in her shoulders easing a fraction more. It became clear to the keepers that Rascal was not just seeking comfort. He was offering something: energy, presence, demand. Where Majesty had spent years existing without expectation, Rascal expected everything: attention, response, engagement. He expected her to be alive with him, and against all odds, she met him halfway. By the second day, she began initiating movement. A slow step, a turn of the head, a deliberate flick of her tail timed just right for him to chase. Each action was measured, controlled, as if she were relearning the mechanics of interaction, one motion at a time. Rascal noticed. He celebrated every response with enthusiasm, redoubling his efforts, pouncing harder, chirping louder, curling closer when the play ended. He slept with his head pressed against her chest, his breathing rising and falling in sync with hers. For Majesty, this closeness did something no enrichment device, no carefully planned intervention had ever accomplished. It made her necessary. Not observed, not managed, needed. That need pulled her back into the world. The watching staff began to understand something important. Rascal was not filling a void left by her past. He was creating something new, an ongoing exchange where both animals gave and received in equal measure. He gave her purpose. She gave him safety. Neither of them knew the rules they were breaking. Neither of them cared. And as days passed and the bond deepened, one truth became impossible to ignore. Rascal was not going to leave her alone. And Majesty, for the first time in years, did not want to be alone again. Fear had always ruled the enclosure. It lived in the invisible boundaries between species, between instincts, between what was allowed and what was possible. The keepers felt it in their tightened shoulders. The visitors felt it in the way their voices dropped when they reached the railing. Even Majesty had lived under it for years, shaped by a life where every sudden sound once meant punishment, every raised hand meant pain. But fear was no longer the strongest force in the space. Protection was. It became clear on the third morning, just after sunrise, when the pride shifted positions as they often did. Caesar, the dominant male, rose from his resting place and stretched muscles rolling beneath his tawny coat. He surveyed the enclosure with the calm authority of an animal who had never doubted his place. Rascal noticed the movement instantly. He froze, ears forward, body taut. His instincts, muted though they were by his early life, recognized something large, powerful, and unfamiliar. He chirped once, uncertain, and instinctively turned toward Majesty. She was already moving. Majesty stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Rascal and Caesar. It was not aggressive. She did not growl or bare her teeth. She simply stood, legs planted, head-high, eyes locked on the male. The message was unmistakable. This one is mine. The keepers held their breath. They had prepared for this moment, rehearsed protocols late into the night. If Caesar challenged her, if he tested her claim, they would have seconds to act, seconds that might not be enough. Caesar paused. He took a step closer, curiosity flickering across his expression. Rascal, unaware of the gravity of the situation, darted sideways and bumped into Majesty's leg. She did not look down. She did not flinch. She held her ground. After a long, tense moment, Caesar turned away, uninterested. He flicked his tail and walked back toward the shade. The issue settled without conflict. Only then did Majesty lower her head. She nudged Rascal gently with her chin, a soft corrective gesture, guiding him back against her chest. He pressed into her fur, heart racing, and after a few seconds, his breathing slowed. The staff exhaled as one. That was when they understood this was no fragile truce. This was a bond backed by resolve. From that moment on, Majesty's behavior shifted subtly but unmistakably. She tracked Rascal, constantly adjusting her movements to match his pace. When he climbed, she stayed close enough to catch him if he slipped. When he explored, she positioned herself to block potential dangers, edges, gaps, other animals that wandered too near. Fear did not vanish. It transformed. The keepers saw it in the way Majesty reacted to their presence. Where she had once tolerated them with indifference, she now watched with focus. When a staff member approached the barrier too quickly, Majesty angled her body protectively around Rascal. Her ears flattened, not in aggression, but in warning. The message was clear. Be careful. This vigilance reached its peak that afternoon when a maintenance error nearly changed everything. A secondary service gate used only during cleaning had not latched properly after morning rounds. It created a narrow opening, barely noticeable, but enough for a curious animal to investigate. Caesar noticed it first, approaching with interest, sniffing the unfamiliar draft of air. Rascal, drawn by movement, started toward the gate. Majesty reacted instantly. She surged forward faster than anyone had ever seen her move and placed her full body between Rascal and the opening. She did not touch him. She did not push him away. She blocked the world. Her head turned towards Caesar, and this time the warning was unmistakable, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the ground. Caesar stopped. He assessed the situation, then stepped back. The keepers moved quickly, securing the gate, hands shaking. They all knew what they had just witnessed. Majesty had not been defending territory. She had been anticipating consequences. If Rascal had reached that gate, emergency protocols would have forced separation. Tranquilizers, barriers, distance, everything that would tear him from her. She had prevented it before it could happen. That level of awareness, of foresight, left the behavioral team stunned. She's planning, Dr. Chen whispered later, reviewing the footage. Not reacting. Planning. The idea rippled through the staff like an aftershock. Majesty, once written off as emotionally unreachable, was making decisions based on the well-being of another species. She was weighing risks, altering her behavior, managing social dynamics within the pride, all for a 4-month-old bobcat who had wandered into her life by accident. As evening fell and temperatures dropped, another test came. Chicago's autumn air cut through the enclosure, sharp and unforgiving. Rascal's fur puffed, but his small body shivered despite it. Majesty noticed. She guided him toward the indoor shelter, nudging him gently with her shoulder. When he hesitated, distracted by a stray leaf, she circled back and positioned herself behind him, guiding him forward without force. Inside, she chose a platform slightly removed from the others. She lay down and curled around him, her body forming a wall against the cold. Rascal crawled into the hollow of her chest, warmth enveloping him completely. She stayed awake for hours. Security cameras captured it, all the rise and fall of her breath, the occasional shift to keep him covered, the way her head lifted at every unfamiliar sound. Fear would have told her to protect herself. Protection told her to stay. The next morning, Rascal woke energetic and hungry, climbing over her with renewed enthusiasm. Majesty responded not with annoyance, but with patience. She stood slowly, allowing him to adjust, then waited while he steadied himself. The keepers watching from a distance understood something profound. This was no longer about preventing harm. It was about choosing care again and again, even when it required vulnerability. Majesty had learned that love carried risk. She had lived the cost of attachment once before in a life taken too early and too cruelly. And yet here she was, choosing it again, not because it was safe, but because it mattered. Fear had once defined her world. Now it was something she stood in front of. And Rascal, small and unaware, slept each night wrapped in the quiet certainty that nothing would reach him without going through her first. In that enclosure, something irreversible had happened. Protection had become more powerful than fear, and nothing would ever return to the way it was before. The moment did not arrive with noise. There was no alarm, no sudden movement, no sharp edge to mark it as important. It came quietly, the way permanent things often do on an ordinary afternoon, when the light slanted just right across the enclosure, and the crowd had thinned to a few lingering visitors. Rascal was sleeping. Curled tight against Majesty's chest, his small body rose and fell in a steady rhythm, one paw tucked beneath his chin, the other resting against her foreleg, as if anchoring himself to her warmth. For the first time since his arrival, his sleep was deep enough that he did not stir when voices drifted from the walkway. Majesty did not sleep. She watched. Her gaze followed the slow arc of the sun, the shadows stretching across the grass, the subtle movements of the pride at the edges of her awareness. But every few seconds, her attention returned to Rascal, checking his breath, adjusting her posture when he shifted, lowering her head slightly whenever a sound carried too close. This was no longer instinct alone. It was habit. The keepers observed from a distance, careful not to interrupt the fragile balance they had learned to respect. They had stopped asking whether the bond would fade. It hadn't. If anything, it had settled into something deeper, quieter, more certain. And then Rascal woke. He stretched back, arching tiny claws extending reflexively, before he caught himself against Majesty's fur. He blinked up at her eyes, still clouded with sleep, and chirped softly. It was a sound he made only with her, a small, intimate call that never reached the ears of the other animals. Majesty lowered her head and touched her nose to his forehead. Rascal stood steady now in a way he hadn't been weeks ago. He moved with confidence, patting across the grass, circling her, once before pouncing playfully at her tail. She flicked it just enough to tease him, then stilled it again, watching him bounce back with exaggerated triumph. It was play, but it was also something else. Rascal paused, ears pricked, attention drawn beyond the enclosure. A group of children had stopped at the railing, pointing, whispering. He studied them briefly, curiosity bright in his eyes, then turned back to Majesty as if checking something. She met his gaze, and for the first time she did not immediately reposition herself between him and the world. Instead, she waited. Rascal took a few steps forward, stopping short of the boundary he had learned not to cross. He looked back again. Majesty remained where she was, calm, present, unafraid. It was subtle, but the keepers saw it. This was trust changing shape. Rascal returned to her, pressing against her leg, and she responded with a low chuff that vibrated through both of them. The sound was no longer tentative. It was certain. Later that day, the veterinary team approached with deliberate slowness. A routine health check for Rascal, overdue but unavoidable. In the past, even minor interventions had caused visible tension, Majesty's body stiffening her attention, sharpening to a single point. This time was different. As the keepers entered the enclosure, Majesty rose and stepped forward, positioning herself in front of Rascal, as she always did. But when Rascal moved toward Kevin's familiar voice, she did not block him. She watched. Rascal hesitated, then walked forward, glancing back once before continuing. Kevin knelt, extending a hand, and Rascal pressed into it without fear. Majesty stayed still. Her muscles were coiled ready, but she did not intervene. She tracked every movement, every sound, but she allowed the space to exist. When Rascal was gently lifted for examination, he chirped once startled, and Majesty responded instantly, a deep grounding rumble that steadied him even from several feet away. He relaxed. The exam was brief. Rascal was healthy, stronger than anyone had expected. When he was set back down, he ran straight to Majesty, climbing against her chest, burying his face in her fur. She wrapped herself around him without hesitation, but something had shifted. That evening, as the enclosure quieted and the lights dimmed, the keepers realized they had witnessed the moment that would define everything that came after. Majesty had learned she did not have to hold him tightly to keep him safe. Rascal had learned he could step away and still belong. In the days that followed, the change deepened. Rascal explored more confident in the invisible tether that always led him back to her. Majesty allowed him that freedom, watching rather than restraining, guiding rather than shielding. She still protected him when it mattered, but she no longer feared the world on his behalf. The transformation was visible to anyone who looked closely. Majesty's posture softened. Her movements grew fluid, assured. The hollow distance that had once lived behind her eyes was gone, replaced by a steady presence that seemed rooted in the present rather than the past. Rascal thrived. His appetite returned fully. His play became more focused, more purposeful. He practiced stalking with exaggerated seriousness, pouncing on shadows, learning from the subtle corrections Majesty offered, with a flick of her tail or a gentle repositioning of her paw. They were no longer filling wounds. They were building something new. On a quiet morning not long after, Kevin stood at the observation window and realized he was witnessing something that would never repeat in quite the same way. This was not a rescue story, not anymore. It was a story of becoming. Majesty, once defined by what had been taken from her, now defined by what she chose to give. Rascal, once adrift and lonely, now grounded by a presence that asked nothing but honesty in return. They would not always need each other the same way. The future would bring changes, new spaces, new routines, new challenges. But the moment that mattered had already passed. The moment when fear loosened its grip. The moment when protection turned into trust. The moment when two broken lives stopped surviving and began living together, but not dependent, bonded, but not bound. That was the moment that changed them both forever. And everyone who witnessed it would carry its echo long after they left the zoo, reminded that healing does not always arrive loudly, and love does not always demand permanence to be real. Sometimes it simply changes you, and that is enough. Some stories stay with us not because they are loud or dramatic, but because they quietly rearrange the way we see the world. The story of Majesty and Rascal is one of those stories. At first glance, it looks impossible. A lioness shaped by years of abuse, emotional isolation, and loss. A tiny bobcat confused, fearless, and desperate for connection. Logic tells us this should have ended in fear or tragedy. Every rule of nature, every safety protocol, every expectation says these two lives should never have touched. And yet they did. What makes this story extraordinary is not just that a predator chose not to harm a smaller animal. It's that healing didn't come from control training or force. It came from presence, from patience, from allowing two broken beings to meet each other exactly as they were. Majesty did not suddenly become gentle because she was taught to. She became gentle because something inside her woke up, something that had been buried under years of survival. Rascal didn't save her by being special or brave. He saved her by being persistent, honest, and unwilling to let silence win. There is a powerful lesson here for all of us. We often think healing means fixing what's broken. This story shows that healing sometimes means allowing space for connection to do the work instead. No one tried to erase Majesty's past. No one forced Rascal to behave a certain way. They were allowed to grow toward each other slowly and perfectly and at their own pace. Another lesson is even more uncomfortable and more important. Fear is not always the most dangerous emotion. Love can be. Love makes us vulnerable. Love creates attachment. Love risks loss. That is why Majesty's choice mattered so much. She had already lost once. She knew the cost, and still she chose to protect, to nurture, to trust again. That decision is what changed everything. Rascal learned something just as profound. He learned that safety does not always mean being held tightly. Sometimes it means being trusted to explore while knowing someone is watching, ready if needed. He learned independence without abandonment, freedom without loneliness. This is not just an animal story, it is a mirror. It reminds us that trauma does not erase the ability to love. That joy can return even after years of emptiness. That connection does not need to be loud to be life-changing. And that compassion, when allowed to exist without fear, can cross boundaries we assume are unbreakable. In a world that often feels divided, rushed, and guarded, Majesty and Rascal offer a quiet challenge. They ask us to slow down, to notice, to consider that sometimes the smallest, most unexpected presence can awaken something long asleep inside us. Healing does not always arrive the way we expect it to. Sometimes it shows up small, persistent, and impossible to ignore. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, you are not alone. These are the stories that remind us why empathy matters, why patience matters, and why love, especially the quiet kind, still has the power to change lives. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories that restore faith and compassion and connection across every boundary, please subscribe to the channel. Your support makes it possible to keep sharing these moments that inspire, heal, and remind us of what truly matters. Because sometimes one story is enough to soften a heart, and sometimes that's how change begins.